Testing. All right, everyone, we're going to get started with Forum in just 2 minutes. I'm so glad to see people staying here and milling around. It's the last Forum today, so go get your coffee quick, use the restroom. We're going to start in 2 minutes.
Check 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're good. All right.
So did you bring your guitar?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for coming to the final Forum of the spring season. So thank you so much. And I also want to say thank you to everyone for supporting Forum and being patient with me as I've taken over a lot of Ardith's roles. It's impossible to replace Ardith. So thank you for supporting Forum. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for me, you're always free to reach out. If you want to join an email list, we have an infrequent email that goes out. So feel free to contact me if you have any ideas. And then we'll see you back in the fall after today. All right, so today we have Rabbi Jay Sherwood from Temple Shalom. And there is our speaker right there. Real quickly, Rabbi Sherwood holds a Master of Arts in Religious Education from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York. He serves on an executive board of the Rocky Mountain Rabbis and Cantors. He's a founding member of the Pikes Peak Interfaith Coalition and serves on the executive board of the, I'm going to mispronounce this, Bakita Mountain Home.
That's it,
It's pretty close? Okay.
That's it.
It's a rehabilitation home for women survivors of human trafficking. He's a multi-instrumentalist, composer, and performer, a regular Renaissance man. And this is really fun. He's probably the only rabbi in history to be a 3-time television game show champion. How about that? He was on, a Rock and Roll Jeopardy, Trivial Pursuit, and Don't Forget the Lyrics. I've never heard of that one. So, Rabbi Sherwood, everyone.
Alrighty, how's our sound? Is our sound okay? So good morning, everyone. Thank you for letting me be here. And I until somebody corrects me, I will claim that I am the only rabbi in history to be a 3-time television game show champion. I believe that to be true, and no one has proven that it's not anymore. I searched all the way back to like the time of the ancient temple, and there were no game show champions from any of those rabbis at all. And just a quick story, when I auditioned for Don't Forget the Lyrics, which is basically, anybody ever seen the show, Don't Forget the Lyrics? They play a song, you sing along with the microphone in your hand, and then there's lyrics on a screen, it's karaoke, and then the lyrics disappear from the screen, and you have to keep singing the song, and if you get the lyrics correct, you win the $10,000 that I won on the show. So, people always ask me, $25,000 is my total game show winnings, because I won before they started giving away millions of dollars. But the producer of that show, when I was auditioning for the show, in the middle of my audition, he says to me, when I had my bar mitzvah, my rabbi couldn't sing like that. So it was kind of a funny thing. But thank you, Rob, for the kind introduction. And we're going to talk today about a very uplifting subject, death. So it's wonderful. First of all, I think it's great that you are learning about other religions and other people around you. I am a firm believer in this concept, that the more you learn about people who are different than you are, you learn that they're not different than you are. And the more you learn about those people, the less you can hate them, because you find out they're not so different. So I love that we learn about each other and create pathways together. So thank you. So we're going to talk today. I'm going to keep sipping on my water here while we talk, because my throat's a little sore. But we're going to talk today about, it's way up there. You guys have to crane your necks all the way. But Jewish perspectives on death and dying and mourning and how do we deal with these things. The slides I have for you today, I don't have any pretty pictures for you other than that one. That's the gateway into Sons of Israel Cemetery, which is Temple Shalom Cemetery here in Colorado Springs. It's on the edge of Evergreen Cemetery. And it's a piece of property that the temple owns. It is a Jewish cemetery. It's been here since the very early 1900s. And I think the first burial was in like 1903 or 1904, when the earliest Jews came to this giant metropolis in 1900 of Colorado Springs. But let's talk a little bit about Jewish tradition in death and dying. And maybe in your own minds, you'll think, how does this compare to what we do in our church? I'm speaking for you by saying our. But you'll do. So let's go to the first slide here, and it'll remind me what I'm talking about if I look at the slide. We can swap slides. There we go. Oh, actually, I was going to do that first. There we go. I'm so glad that I memorized all my slides. When we study in the Jewish world, we always say a blessing. And so if you'll permit me, I'll say it in Hebrew, and then maybe you can say it in English with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And if you'll read it with me in the English. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us holy with your mitzvot and commands us to engage in the words of Torah. So just a couple of translations. Adonai, a name for God in Hebrew. Mitzvot means commandments. So it basically says, God, you gave us commandments, and one of them is to engage with the words of the Torah. And by Torah, I don't just mean the 5 books of Moses, I mean all of Jewish learning. Okay, so whenever we study together, we say this prayer because we believe that study is a holy thing. I hope you believe study is a holy thing. And so thank you for engaging in that blessing with me. So we'll go to our next slide here. Death and dying. So let's talk about, first of all, the moments before death. So we have a prayer that we say called Misha Berach. Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov Imotenu Sarav Karach Chavalea Hu Yivarech V'Yarpeh Et HaCholim. Translation. May the one who sends blessings to our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah send blessing and healing to those who are ill. We say the blessing for anyone who's ill, but the idea is in death and dying is that up till the moment of death, we should be praying for someone's healing. Now, healing is a key word. So let me stop for a moment and say this. Healing. Let's step back from that too. Words. Can we go to words before we go to healing? Let's go to words. Words are difficult because what I think a word means, you might not think it means that. Especially if we're translating between languages. You'll see a lot of Hebrew, not written in Hebrew, but written in English characters. I hope that's okay with you. I would have put it in the Hebrew, but I was figuring any Hebrew scholars in the room that would like it in the Hebrew, I'll type it up and we'll put it in the Hebrew. Anyone? That's what I thought. So I put it in the English characters for you, so we're good. But when we use words, especially words that deal with religion, religious words are fraught with meaning in my religion, right? And when other people use my religious word, they clearly don't have the same idea that I do, right? So let's keep that in mind as we make our way through some of these words and some of these concepts, that we may mean different things by different words, and when we ask questions, we'll go through that. But Misha Berach, a prayer for healing, and we want people to heal. Now, healing is a different thing than curing. Because people might say, why are you saying a prayer for someone who in the next 24 hours is going to die? Why are you saying a prayer for healing for them? And the answer is that we're not saying a prayer for curing, we're saying a prayer for healing. Sometimes healing and curing are the same thing. Sometimes healing is coming to terms with what's going on. And so up to the moment of death, we still say a prayer for healing. Right before the moment of death, we do something called vidui. Vidui is a confessional. I understand the Catholic Church might have copied something from us on the vidui thing. They call it last rites or something, but we were doing it for thousands of years before they started doing it. No, we love sharing, don't get me wrong. It's all wonderful and great. Vidui literally means confessional, and the idea is this, that as we lie on our deathbed, we confess before God that I may have sinned knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally, in big ways or in small ways. And as I come to the end of my life, let me confess before you, God, that I have committed sins and that you hopefully will forgive me before I go into the world to come, which is also a Jewish term, the world to come. We'll come to that one on another slide a little bit down the road. At the moment of death, we say the Shema. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. A confession, kind of a statement of understanding the oneness of God. And then we have a concept called Kriya that some people do at the moment of death, is that we tear our clothing. Why do we tear our clothing? In ancient times, they wore sackcloth and ashes when someone died, right? We've heard of this idea. And they would tear the sackcloth. Today, in some communities, people still tear their clothing. In other communities, we put on a nice little ribbon and tear the ribbon. Why do we do that? Because in the year 2023, clothing is expensive. And I went to a funeral once. I was wearing this tie, not this one, I mean with Mickey and all on here, but I was wearing this tie, and it was an Orthodox funeral, and the rabbi who was leading the funeral came up with a pair of scissors and snipped my tie right in half. I was like, but I paid... Never mind. But the idea of tearing our clothing when someone dies is this, that when someone dies, our hearts are torn. And so the tearing of clothing, or of the ribbon that we put on our clothing, is a way to look inside to remind people that our hearts are torn. When someone dies, what do? We cry, right? And hopefully we also laugh. Because when we remember the wonderful times with those people, we get a smile on our face because they brought joy to our lives. You can't cry all the time. It's not physically possible. Sometimes you cry and sometimes you laugh. Sometimes you smile and sometimes you frown. But in those moments when you're laughing or smiling, people still need to know that your heart is torn. And so that rending of the clothing is an idea of the tearing of our hearts, an outward expression to people. So this is leading up to death, a vidui. Sometimes the confessional is done by the dying person. Sometimes it's done by a family member. Sometimes they call the rabbi in, and I go into the hospital or the hospice place or the home, and I'll say the blessings of vidui, of confessional, on behalf of the family. So what happens when you die? Let's go to the next slide here. We prepare the body for burial. We have something called a chevra kadisha. It's not up on the board up there. But Chevra Kadisha means holy society. And what does the holy society do? They prepare the body for burial. We do something called tahara. Tahara means purification. The family is not involved because you don't prepare the body of your own family. Other people do in the community do on behalf of you. In some communities, it is a professional organization. In some communities, it is a volunteer organization. Here in Colorado Springs, Temple Shalom operates a Chevra Kadisha that does the tahara, that does the preparation of the body. It's all volunteers from the congregation. The money that it costs to do this is provided by donations, and we have 2 mortuaries in town who work with us and provide us with the facility in their mortuary to be able to do that. The name of those 2 mortuaries will be revealed after they decide to pay me to advertise for them. So I'm not on their payroll. I'm not giving them props. I love that we can go there, but there are lots of mortuaries in town, and I advertise for none of them. But we do have 2 in town that they give us a preparation room. So what is tahara? The body is washed. There's a male team and a female team. Men wash the body of a man. Women wash the body of a woman. And which leads to whole other questions in modern times of transgender, and that's a whole other discussion of how do we work with that. We do, but it's a much bigger discussion than we want to have. We don't have time to get into. That's like a 2-week discussion in a whole class, and but it works out. And the body is washed, literally washed. Shampoo of the hair, cleaning under the fingernails, washing any dirt on the body, removing any dirt that might be from procedures that happened in the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a ritual washing with some prayers that are said of the body. And then the body is dressed in something that we call tachrichin, which means shrouds. So the body is dressed in linen shrouds, and as each thing is placed on the body, we read a portion out of the Torah that describes the dressing of the high priest, because those shrouds are supposed to mimic the clothing that the high priest wore in the ancient temple. Once the body is washed, the body is then put into a casket, and we get to this word shmirah that's up there for you right there. And I think that's my Chevra Kadisha calling me right now. But the body is placed into a casket, and let me know if they need me, because I'm... Yeah, I didn't hear a thing. I heard nothing. So the body is placed in a casket. When we bury, and you'll see this on another slide, but we bury in a plain wood box. We'll talk about that in a moment. And the body is then guarded, because the idea is this, that until we say a particular prayer in the funeral, and we'll talk about that prayer in a couple of minutes here, that the body and the soul are still connected, that the soul has stepped out of the body, so to speak, but is still in our presence. And because the body no longer can serve as a vessel to protect the soul, right, a shell that the soul is inside of, and the soul is kind of floating out there, we have shmirah, which means guarding. And people will guard over the body to make sure that the soul and the body are protected until the funeral happens. We have volunteers, again, that do that. In some cities, there are professional organizations that do these things. In my opinion, they charge too much money. Too much money, in my opinion, is anything more than zero, because I believe it's a spiritual act that people should volunteer to do. But there are, in bigger cities, there are professional organizations. But we have guardians who will guard. We have people that take 2-hour shifts, usually, sometimes a 3-hour shift, all through the night, because we bury as quickly as possible. And then finally, kavura, which means burial. And we'll come to the next slide here, and we'll talk a bit about Jewish burial. So, there we are. No embalming, no cremation. That's the rules of Jewish burial. Do Jews get embalmed? Yes, they do. Do very many Jews get embalmed? No, they do not. Do people who are traditional get embalmed? No. But does it happen? Yeah. Are there people in your church who don't follow the rules of your church? Yeah. Don't tell the pastor. She's over there. But I always tell people, don't tell the rabbi that you're breaking the rules of the temple. But people are people, right? We have religious doctrines, and some people follow religious doctrines, and some people don't follow religious doctrines, and that's the way the world works. If people come to me, I tell them no embalming and no cremation either. The idea behind no cremation, you'll hear from people that will tell you, well, in the Holocaust, people were killed in the crematoriums and they were burned in the crematoriums, and so therefore we don't do cremation. It's a very heavy and deep meaning. That's not why we don't do cremation. But I hear people tell that all the time, so I thought I'd bring that up and say that's not the reason. I don't want to do anything in my religion because of fighting against what bad people did. I want to do things in my religion because of what God wants from me. And so I've heard people say that's the reason that Jews don't do cremation. That's not the reason. The reason we don't do cremation is because Judaism says that we should go back to the earth the way we came out, all natural. And so we should decompose naturally, etc. And so this is the idea of no embalming, no cremation. So we do burial as quickly as possible. If we were in Israel, often burial happens the same day that the person died. In America, that doesn't happen. If you're in Los Angeles or New York, specifically Los Angeles or New York, Los Angeles County and New York City have a Jewish Muslim desk at the county records office. They're the only two cities in the country that have that. And the reason they do is because Jews and Muslims bury quickly, and you need, in every state in America, well, not every state, most of the states, 40-some states, you need a burial permit. You do here in Colorado. You need a burial permit to bury someone. And that means that there's some functionary who gets paid minimum wage at the county clerk's office that has to get you that permit. Anybody ever work with government officials? Yeah. So in Los Angeles and New York, there's a Jewish Muslim desk who push those burial permits very quickly so we can do burial very quickly, as we have up there. We do burial in a simple wood casket. That means no metal and no other foreign objects. That means everything has to be able to biodegrade in the ground. We don't put people in tombs. Again, this is the traditional answer to things. Are there people who do all those things? Yeah, there are. Metal caskets are out, only wood caskets. No nails, no screws, no hinges, wooden pegs to put everything together, and biodegradable glue. And the idea is a simple casket. Where does it come from? Rabbi Gamliel II, who was the president of the Sanhedrin, the ancient rabbinical court in Israel, was a rather wealthy man. If the Forbes 500 existed in ancient times, he would have been on the list. He was incredibly wealthy. He was also incredibly brilliant. And when he died, he gave the rule that said, I will be carried out to the graveyard by simple people. No rabbi will touch my body. It will be common people. And I will be buried in a plain shroud. There will be no fancy ceremonies. My ceremony will be like the poorest person in town. And ever since Rabbi Gamliel, that's been our tradition. So people get buried in a simple pine casket, or a simple oak casket, or a simple maple casket. I mean, pick your wood, whichever you want. Usually there are caskets that are available that are kosher caskets in this way that are very, very expensive. Long ago and far away, I worked for a mortuary. It was an odd experience, but we sold in the mortuary the Millennium Casket. That's right, the Millennium Casket. It was a very fancy, it wasn't a Jewish mortuary, it was an everybody mortuary, and the Millennium Casket was very on the inside, hand-plushed purple velvet, because the person inside cared. On the outside, gold-plated, with gold handles and gold roses on all four corners. It's the casket that Whitney Houston was buried in, and Michael Jackson, and Eazy-E for you rap fans in the room, right? not a casket I would ever be buried in or recommend to anybody. Back then, and this is a lot of years ago, it was $50,000. And I wondered, why are you sticking $50,000 in the ground and not using $50,000 to feed hungry people? That's what I think. But this is why we're buried in a simple casket, simple wood casket that will biodegrade along with the body in the ground, simple ceremony, simple shroud, and buried as quickly as possible, hence no embalming needed, because we're going back into the ground the way we came out, all natural. One more word up here, in a dedicated Jewish cemetery. Here in Colorado Springs, we have Sons of Israel. You saw the picture of the gate a little earlier. What makes it a Jewish cemetery? Well, it's that we consecrate the ground to be a Jewish cemetery. Our cemetery, Sons of Israel, as I said, right on the side of Evergreen Cemetery. It is not owned by Evergreen Cemetery. It's owned by Temple Shalom. We do hire the people at Evergreen Cemetery to mow the lawn for us. And they dig the holes as well because we don't have a full-time staff that does that. But the idea is the ground has been consecrated as a Jewish cemetery. And then there are particular rules about, in an Orthodox cemetery, men and women who are not married to each other being buried next to each other, how much space there needs to be for the casket, all that sort of stuff. So this is burial. So let's talk a little bit about the funeral. We'll go to the next slide here. There we go. There are 3 portions of a Jewish funeral: Nechama, Hesped, and Kavura. I think that's what's up there. That's good. Okay. Nechama means comfort. We begin a Jewish funeral with words from the book of Psalms. You might find some of them familiar. The 150 Psalms in the Jewish Bible, strangely, the same 150 Psalms in the Christian Bible. However, the translations, we might not necessarily agree on the translations because that's a whole other story. And of course, none of us have the 151st Psalm. It does exist. Do you all know there's a 151st Psalm? Did everybody know that? We found them in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why did we not add it back into the Bible? Here's the answer. Anybody know the Hebrew word chutzpah? You have the chutzpah to add another psalm into the Bible after all these thousands of years? Who do you think you are? Right? But we read some of the psalms that are psalms of comfort. Of course, the most famous one you all know. You might know the translation differently. Adonai roi lo echzar. Sound familiar? I'll do it in English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, right? And so we have other psalms of comfort that we use. Who's being comforted? The mourner and the soul of the person who died. The Hebrew word for funeral is levaya. And if you open up a Hebrew English dictionary, you will find that it says funeral is levaya, but levaya doesn't mean funeral. I know the dictionary people are going to argue with me about that. Levaya actually means accompanying. The idea of a Jewish funeral is we are there, the people who are gathered, to accompany the soul of the dead as it begins its journey to the world to come. Isn't that a beautiful idea? We're not there to bury, we are going to bury a body, and that's part of what we do. But the main idea of what we're doing, we are there to accompany the soul on the beginning of its journey to go be with God for all of eternity. It's a beautiful thing of what the Hebrew word is. And I don't think the English word funeral captures that idea. We say psalms to comfort the soul of the departed and psalms to comfort the family. Next, hesped. We usually translate hesped as eulogy. I guess it's sort of a eulogy. Oftentimes when I hear eulogies from some people, they say, Mr. or Mrs. Fill in the blank was born on blah, blah date and died on blah, blah date. They lived over there, they lived over there, they worked here, and thanks for coming, everybody. But a hesped is a teaching. When we talk about a person who died, we should learn from their life. If we bury someone and we stick them in the ground and we walk away, I don't know that, there's some meaning in it. But what's a bigger meaning? To speak of the person who died and leave the sanctuary or leave the cemetery with a lesson from their life, with the intention to go out and live that lesson. And that's the idea of what a hesped is. To speak of someone's life, I always call it this way. There's a picture frame. Born this day, died this day, lived here, went to school here, worked here. That's the picture frame. It holds up the rest. And what's the picture in the middle? Who were they? What did they do? Why is the world a better place? Right? That word why, I'm always troubled by that word why, because people ask me that at funerals all the time. Rabbi, why? Why did they die? Why with this horrible disease? Why so young? Why in this way? And I tell people this, stop asking the question. Don't ask why. It's not just good Jewish advice, I think it's good everybody advice. When someone dies, don't ask why. Because no matter how far you search, no matter how deeply you explore, you will never find the answer to that question. Ask a different question. How? How is the world better because my loved one was part of it? Do we all know the answer to that question? We usually do. What? What did they do that made the world a better place? We can do that one too. Where? Where can I teach and live the lessons that this person taught to me in their life? These are all questions that I can find answers to. Why? Never find that answer. So why waste my time even asking the question? I'll ask those other questions. And this is the idea of the hesped, to find those answers. And finally, kavura, burial, where we bury into the ground. At a Jewish funeral, the casket is lowered while everybody is there, and everybody participates in placing earth into the grave. The idea is this. There's a few ideas about it, but basically it's this. When someone dies, if you've read the book by Dr. Kubler-Ross about death and dying and the stages of grieving, anybody read that book? Anybody have no idea what I'm talking about? If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can buy, it's used for $1.25 on Amazon. Go buy it, and you'll understand the stages of mourning so much better. It's an amazing book written in the 1960s, and she was a genius and put this all together for us. But one of the stages is denial. How can this be? My loved one died, my friend died, my family member died. It couldn't be. But if I have to pick up a shovel and go through the act of throwing dirt into the grave on top of the casket, it's a wake-up call to say, no more denial, this is real. And in some ways, you need to deal with this in your own way of grief. We each have our own way of grief. And so that moment of burial, as the casket is lowered, there are a few burial prayers that we say, including one called El Malei Rachamim. God, full of compassion, may you have compassion upon the soul of this person who has died. May you protect them beneath the shelter of your wings. May they be bound up in the bond of eternal life with you, and may they rest in peace. That's close to a translation of all of the words in El Malei Rachamim. And then we place them in the ground and finish the burial. And in the more traditional sense, the community fills the grave all the way till it's full. In a less traditional sense, each person places a shovel or two, and then the grounds crew finishes the work. At our cemetery, it's always members of the congregation who fill the grave. Then the evergreen guys come and tamp it down and add a little more dirt so that the grass doesn't fall, but that's technical stuff there. We'll go to another slide here. After the funeral, I'll check my timing and make sure I'm okay for you guys here. I'll talk for a couple more minutes and then we'll take some questions. But after the funeral, Avelut means mourning, and we go through stages of mourning. Shiva, Shloshim, and Shana. Shiva, the first week of mourning, the most intensive period. Shloshim, the word literally means 30, 1 month of mourning. And Shana, which means month, or means year, which is 11 months. We'll talk about that in a moment. Anybody else have an 11-month year? Some years I wish it was 11 months. The rabbis of old were very wise. They understood that we go through stages of intensity of our mourning. Shiva means 7. It's also related to the word sitting, so we sit Shiva. We stay at home, we say memorial prayers, people bring food to us, people bring the service to our home so that we don't have to make the effort to go to the synagogue. And the mourner's prayers are said each day in the home. People bring food, the prayer, etc. When the rabbi said a week of mourning, I don't believe they meant a week. I think they saw that most people, the most intensive part is a week. For some people, that means 4 days. For some other people, it means 11. But it's about a week that most people go through their most intense mourning. Shloshim, 30 days, a month. You're allowed to leave the home. There are mourning customs that people have in very, very traditional circles. People will cover their mirrors. They'll sit on low stools in the home. They won't shave. This is not for mourning. This is just because I haven't shaved in 40 years or something. But Shloshim, you're allowed to leave the home. You can go back to work, etc. And it's a little less intense. For some people, that's 15 days. For some people, that's, 92 days. But the rabbis of old saw that for most people, it's around a month. So they standardized this time period as the next period of mourning. And then 11 months. We mourn for 1 year officially, and then after that year, we can move on, so to speak, with our lives. Jewish tradition says you can get remarried after that year is over. You annually say a memorial prayer, but you don't have to do it all the time like you do during the first year, right? Why 11 months? I love this story. This is a Kabbalistic story that says this. When we go to the world to come, we'll have that word on the next slide in just a moment here. When we go to the world to come, our soul is purified and we exist in a place with God. For the average person, it takes a year for that person to go through the purification of their soul to be with God. Who am I to believe that my loved one is merely average? My loved one would only need 11 months, not 12. On the surface, it's a little funny, but then take it below the surface a little bit. Isn't that a beautiful idea? To think so highly of the ones that we love, to say that their life was so good that they don't need the full year. What a beautiful idea of respect for those who died that we love, to say only 11 months. That's it, and their soul will be purified. Let's go to the next slide here. Memorialization. A matzeva is a headstone. There's a tradition of unveiling a headstone. We do it at the 11-month mark usually, or sometimes a little later, but usually at the 11-month mark. Very American tradition. Does not exist in Europe, does not exist in Israel. When the early Jewish settlers came to America, the first Jewish settlers, by the way, came to America on a ship from Recife, Brazil in 1654. And not long after that, they started seeing that Americans, whatever those were in the 16 and 1700s, were doing some kind of ceremony to unveil the headstone of someone. And so they said, well, let's do that because we'll be American, but let's do it in a Jewish way. And so they created a ceremony here to do it. It's a very American ceremony to unveil the headstone. Headstone usually just a name, dates, and usually some Hebrew expressions. There's a few different traditions. Yard site. Yard site is the annual memorial, and on the anniversary of the death, we say what's called the mourner's Kaddish, or a mourner's sanctification prayer. There's also an idea of Yizkor. We actually said Yizkor yesterday, because Yizkor Memorial, we do it on Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, the 3 harvest festivals, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And we do a memorial prayer for all who have died on those particular holidays. What other words did I put up there? Kaddish. Kaddish is a prayer that is in Aramaic, except for the last sentence. The last sentence is Hebrew, but everything else is Aramaic. It does not mention death. It does not mention dying. It does not mention mourning. It does not mention sadness. It says, God, you are great, awesome, amazing, incredible, fantastic, the best. May the one who makes peace in the heavens make peace for us and for all people. Amen. That's what the prayer basically says. It leads to a question. Why, when we're mourning someone, would we say, God, you are great? Because I'll tell you, 10 years ago, last month, this is May, right? 10 years ago, last month is when my father passed away. And on the day of my father's funeral, I can tell you, my father was a rabbi and I'm a rabbi, and on that day, I didn't think God was so great. I know that might sound sacrilegious to say, but my dad died. I wanted my dad to live forever. I mean, I know people don't live forever, but I'm the son. I want my dad to live forever, right? And on that day, I wasn't so happy with God. My dad died from leukemia, and he suffered in the last few months of his life. I was kind of mad at God. If you were going to let my dad die, just let him go to sleep and not wake up. Why did you make him suffer? You know, he wasn't that old. My dad was in his early 70s when he died. So why would I say a prayer saying, God, you are great? And the answer is this. Because this is a way of saying to God, thank you for letting this person be in my life. You're great because you gave them to me for the time that I had them. And this is the reason that we use this prayer. Do I have another slide? I don't even remember. 2 more. This one and then the next one, right? We want to get to the next one quickly, so I'm just going to mention Olam Haba, the world to come. This is a 12-hour lecture. What happens after you die? The Jewish world and the Christian world, we don't see the same thing. In the Jewish world, when you die, your soul goes to the Olam Haba. We say in Hebrew, Me'olam hazeh le'olam haba, which means from this world to the world to come. What is the world to come? I don't know. The Christian world, most of the Christian world, I know there's all kinds of philosophies. They've told me there's over 500 Christian denominations in America. I can't fathom that. That blows my mind. I mean, we have basically 4 denominations of Jews, and we argue enough between us. I'm trying to think the arguments between 500 denominations of Christians. Oh, no. But in Hebrew, in Hebrew, that's oy vey. But actually, that's not Hebrew, that's Yiddish, but that's another class. The world to come is a place where our soul exists with God. What does it look like? I don't know. What does it feel like? I don't know. Judaism teaches that when we die, our soul goes to be with God in some realm beyond human comprehension, where our soul will be with God until the end of time. That's where all the Jews start arguing with each other of what does God mean, what does eternity mean, what does end of time mean, etc., etc. But that's the idea of that our soul goes to some place to exist with God that's beyond human comprehension. So with that, I've talked a lot, you haven't talked at all. We're going to go to the next slide, which I think says questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you have about anything I talked about or anything I didn't talk about. Yes.
You didn't say, but I wonder, what does the stone on the gravestone, you know, the rocks and stones that people put on the grave?
Oh yeah, great question. So in a Jewish cemetery, you usually don't see flowers. Occasionally you might see flowers on a headstone, but you'll see stones piled up on a headstone. There are lots of explanations for this. One of the explanations is that the wind could blow a flower onto a headstone, but it can't blow a rock onto a headstone. So a rock on top means that you visited. If people want to believe that, I think that's lovely. That's not the real reason, but I think it's a lovely story that some rabbi made up a couple of 100 years ago. It's a lovely thing. It's also that rocks show a permanence, whereas why would you bring something into a cemetery that's going to die? Because flowers will die. Why would you bring plastic flowers into a cemetery? Because that's something that's not real. So we don't want unreal things, and we don't want things that will die. So instead we place a stone on the gravestone. That's another lovely story that some rabbi made up probably about 500 years ago. I'll tell you what the real reason is. This is what I believe. We know that when Rachel died in the Bible, okay? First of all, we know Abraham purchased a cave to bury Sarah, right? The cave of Machpelah. Anybody ever been to the cave of Machpelah? It's a cool experience. You should go sometime. You should all go to Israel. You should. That's my big pitch. If you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or Baha'i, you should go to Israel because it's just an amazing place to be, and plus the food's really good. So that's the other reason to go there. But I mean, falafel and shawarma. Okay, anyway, I'm getting hungry for lunch. But Abraham bought a cave to bury Sarah. And Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah are buried in that cave, according to tradition. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried in that cave, according to tradition. But we know Rachel died somewhere along the way between the city of Jerusalem and Hebron. And today, there's a kibbutz there. It's called Ramat Rachel, the Heights of Rachel. And the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis that when Jacob buried Rachel, he piled up stones on her grave. This is the oldest record that I know of, and I believe it to be the oldest record in history of someone putting stones on a grave. This is the origin of a gravestone. This is why we put a headstone on a grave, because Jacob piled up stones. And because he piled up stones, we Jews also pile up stones to mark the place where a person is buried. The idea of a headstone in the scheme of world history, it's pretty new. It's less than, as far as we know, it's no more than about 2,000 years old. Actually, what we all know is a headstone in a cemetery, roughly 2,000 years old. We don't have much before that of marking headstones, but we piled up stones. And so it's really a biblical thing of piling up stones on a grave to mark a place where someone is buried. Other questions? Yeah.
Rabbi, thank you for being here. One of the things that fascinates me is the similarities between Judaism and Islam, because much of these life traditions come from the same books, some of the same teachings. Leaving aside the world to come, because that's a long story, but of the rituals that you have been describing for burial and the requirements and so on, how much of that is similar within the Islamic tradition, if you can tell us?
So I'm not an expert in all things of Islam, but I can tell you that Islam does do a ritual washing of the body. Islam does dress someone in shrouds for burial. Islam does not do cremation, and Islam does not do embalming. They do immediate burial. And so there are quite a few similarities between the Islamic world and the Jewish world. When I worked for that mortuary that I mentioned, I did a Muslim funeral. And I had my kippah on my head. I was not yet a rabbi for part of it. It was why I was in rabbinical school when I worked at the mortuary. But I was out in the cemetery with my kippah on my head. And in the modern world, up until the modern times, Muslims and Jews got along pretty well. In modern times with Israel and the Palestinians, that's another 75-year-long class. But sometimes there's some hard feelings there. And I worked with this Muslim family, and I was out in the cemetery, and there were some people giving me some dirty looks because I had my kippah on my head. And the son of the guy who died pulled me by the arm in front of everybody and hugged me and said, "This guy who's about to be a rabbi made sure that everything was done the right Muslim way because no one else here knew how to help me at this mortuary. And so my father got buried in the right way because this guy who's almost going to be a rabbi made sure that all the Muslim traditions were followed." And it was easy. First of all, I wanted to do that because it was the right thing to do. Secondly, I did it because there are so many similarities to the washing and the dressing and the immediate burial and all of those pieces. So quite a few things that are very, very similar. And I understand that there is in the Muslim world, and I haven't explored it enough to really comment on it too much, but there is a tradition about stones in the Muslim world, but I don't know what that's about because it's not something I've studied and seen. But there's something there, and I don't know what it is. But yeah, quite a few similarities. There are a whole bunch of other hands here. Yes.
Okay. I think you already answered the question, but you don't embalm, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no embalming. And the reason for embalming, again, is the idea that we came into this world naturally, we'll go out of this world naturally. Embalming lengthens that process. And so we don't want to lengthen that process of the body decomposing, ashes to ashes, et cetera. Yeah. Over here, yeah.
You. There it is. Okay, I have a couple questions. The first one is that there's a growing movement now for different methods of green burial, so including like composting and water composting. And so first of all, I'm wondering what your thoughts would be on those and if they would be acceptable as means of decomposing a body. And then the second one is that, I've been seen or been sent some videos of Jewish people alive now who seem to experience what people have experienced before them, particularly very traumatic experiences such as would happen in the Holocaust. And so I'm wondering if there's any tradition of reincarnation in Judaism, and if so, how literally is it taken?
So, Each one of those questions is a 3-week-long class, but we'll try to give a little bit of an answer to both of them. So clearly you've been spying on me because at the last Board of Rabbis meeting, your first question was exactly the topic of our last Board of Rabbis meeting, because there is a Jewish mortuary in Denver. It's the only one in the state of Colorado that is an actual Jewish mortuary. And I'm not going to tell you their name either, because they still haven't paid me either, like all the mortuaries here. But they came to us to talk to us about how do we, as the Board of Rabbis of the state of Colorado, feel about the idea of composting, water composting, and these other green burial ideas, right? And the answer is, the short answer is this: it's really, really complicated. Because there is, I should have said this at the very beginning, there is no Jewish view on anything. There are Jewish views on everything, right? So there's an old joke that if you have 2 Jews in a room, you have 6 opinions. So now imagine if you get a whole congregation and then a room full of rabbis. Oh, don't even get me started. But the idea is, halakha is the word for Jewish law. It literally means the way we go or the way we walk. According to halakha, Jewish law, would things like composting, water composting, these other green burial ideas be something that we can do? And the answer is, the longer answer is, it depends. There's different interpretations of, is that okay? Most of the Jewish world at this point in time says, no, those things are not okay, because everything is supposed to be natural. And yes, green burial is natural, but it's also helping the process along. And that's not natural. Even though the process itself is natural, speeding up the process, which is what the composting does, the water, etc., that all speeds up the process, and that's not okay. It's also interesting that people say we're going to do green burial because we're going to save money. Most places, green burial is actually more expensive than traditional burial. If that's going to be the case in the future, my crystal ball is still in the shop, so I can't tell you the answer to that. But at this point in time, most green burial options are more expensive than traditional burial options. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? And so then it becomes, if we do say okay to composting, what do we do with the material that's left over, right? Can we, what do you do with composted material? You feed your plants, right? Makes your plants go great because you have compost, right? If you compost your scraps from dinner, right, you have all kinds of great material to feed your garden with, right? It's a great thing. Would that be okay to use composted human remains, which technically are no longer human remains, but they're does that become a thing that you can use or not? And this is a great debate in the Jewish world right now, and there is no definitive answer. Most of the Orthodox world is saying absolutely no. Most of the rest of the Jewish world is saying, I haven't figured it out yet. And so it's a complex question right now that we don't know. If people come to me, my answer right now is I'm against all of those things right now until, 1, it becomes cheaper, and 2, we really figure out what the whole bigger picture of it is, because we don't quite understand all of it yet and all of its ramifications. I've done one funeral that had composting. That's a whole other story of, will I do funerals of people that are embalmed or people that are cremated? That's a whole other picture there. And the answer is that different rabbis have different feelings about that. The second one, what was the second one? Oh, reincarnation. Do Jews believe in reincarnation? Yes, we do. No, we don't. So the answer is there's a spectrum of Jewish belief. On one end of the spectrum, there's a Jewish belief that says that when you die, that's it, you're done, over, nothing else happens. That's one extreme end of the spectrum. The other extreme end of the spectrum, way over here, I think it's on the other side of this railing, it's way over here, is that we get reincarnated, our souls become reincarnated. This is a small portion of the Jewish world in the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic world, and not all of that world, just a portion of it, where our souls continue to be reincarnated into new bodies because as our existence is now, we have not done all the work of asking for forgiveness for our sins, and our sins are still, in the very technical Yiddish word, filled with schmutz. Schmutz means dirt. We have schmutzidik souls That means dirty souls, right? We have dirty souls because we haven't done enough forgiveness yet, and God reincarnates our soul into a new body so that we can do more work in the world to ask for forgiveness for our sins. So there's a spectrum of belief there. Where do I fall on that spectrum? About here. Right about. I'm somewhere in the middle there. I'm uncertain. So there we go. But yes, there is a portion of the Jewish world that believes in reincarnation. Over here.
I have long been interested in natural death, and it's very interesting to me to hear about your Jewish cemetery here in Colorado Springs. Do I have to become Jewish to be buried there?
Yeah, so Jewish cemeteries, only people who are Jewish, well, let me take a step back. In a traditional Orthodox or conservative-run cemetery, which our cemetery is here, our cemetery was begun as an Orthodox cemetery, and we've maintained it that even though our congregation is not Orthodox, we own the cemetery, and we made an agreement with those who handed it off to us from the Orthodox world of 100+ years ago that we would maintain it as an Orthodox cemetery. So a Jewish cemetery, you must be Jewish to be buried in it. That we do have a new section of our cemetery where someone who is not Jewish but married to someone who's Jewish could be buried alongside them in that new section of the cemetery. We just opened it about a year and a half ago, this new section. It has its own walls and its own fence, so it's separate from our cemetery that goes by the traditional burials. But that one is allowed. But other than that, the only way that someone not Jewish is buried, usually in any Jewish cemetery, even liberal ones, is if they're married to someone who's not Jewish. We do have rules about the cemetery. If a non-Jewish spouse is buried in the cemetery, there can be no non-Jewish, no other religion symbols on a headstone. There can be no burial cemetery in a religion that is not Judaism. And so there's a few other rules that go along with it. And there are cemeteries around the country that might have some variations on those rules, but most Orthodox or conservative cemeteries, you must be Jewish. More liberal cemeteries, you must be part of a Jewish family. Yeah. Yes?
Hi. Hello? Okay. Hi. Thank you, Rabbi, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. I have a question. If this is outside of the scope of the discussion, I understand, but it just... Hi.
There we go. That's better. There you go.
Okay. All right, I'll start over. Thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. I have a question. This may be outside of the scope of the discussion, but the discussion just kind of piqued my interest in this. If someone, and my apologies if you've already answered it, say if someone passes away and the cause of death isn't immediately known, in the traditions, is autopsy permitted?
Great question, yeah. So because we do immediate burial, so I touched on this a little bit of the idea of a burial permit. So for someone to be buried, we need a burial permit in the state of Colorado. And I said we do immediate burial. Sometimes immediate burial gets held up a little bit. So what does immediate mean? Immediate means right now. But if there's a holdup, for instance, if someone in my congregation died Friday, which they did not, thank God, but if they had died Friday, this was a couple, 2 days ago, we might not have had a funeral till Wednesday because the Colorado Springs and the El Paso County Records Office were closed yesterday and today and tomorrow for Memorial Day. And the mortuary might not be able to get into their office to get a burial permit till Tuesday. And if they can't get it out to us till Tuesday, we might not have a funeral till Wednesday. Let me see, Friday to Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's 5 days later, which is 3 or 4 days longer than we want to be. But sometimes we get held up by that. In other times, we might get held up by an autopsy. There is a law in the Talmud that says in Aramaic, Dina de Malchuta Dina. It means the law of the land is the law. So if the law of El Paso County or Colorado Springs or the state of Colorado or the United States of America says that the coroner says there needs to be an autopsy because there was a suspicion about the death, we are bound to follow the laws of the land in which we live. Now, have I as a rabbi ever made an autopsy not happen? Yes. Yes, I have. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever done because, again, I was dealing with government officials. But we felt that the circumstances of the death were not suspicious, and we convinced the coroner's office to let us do the burial early. And so we actually got the autopsy canceled. But if the autopsy is needed, if God forbid there was a murder or some other suspicious something that happened, then an autopsy often does take place. And so if that's required, I do everything I can to make that not required, but sometimes legally it is. And so we'll have to wait till the end of the autopsy to be done. If people come to me and say, they offered me to do an autopsy, I'll tell them, say no. I sometimes have family who want to come to me and they say, we can't figure out why he died. Can I go get an autopsy? And the most recent time this happened, this is a true story. The most recent time it happened, my answer, I told the family, you don't need an autopsy. I'll tell you why he died. He was 99 and he had cancer. That's why he died. You don't need an autopsy. But we thought he had another year. Because we all want them to have another year, right? That's something we want. I told you about my dad. I wanted my dad to have another 50 years, right? Or, well, yeah, almost 50. Because we have an expression in Hebrew, Ad Mea Vesrim. It means to 120. Moses lived to be 120. We should all live to be as long as Moses lived. To 120 is the expression. My dad was in his 70s, so almost 50 years. I would have wished for him, right? But even though we have that desire, yes, autopsies are permitted when they're needed, but the goal is to have them only in rare circumstances. So, yeah.
Good morning.
Up over here, yes.
My question. Yes, thank you.
There we go.
If I didn't have him, I don't know how I could behave properly. But my question concerns proper behavior. If we as Christians come to a Jewish family or a Jewish funeral, are there certain things we should know so we behave appropriately and don't make ourselves the center of attention?
So anyone who attends a Jewish funeral, the decorum of a Jewish funeral is the decorum of most funerals. Unless they told you so, and this happened in one case, I wouldn't show up in shorts and T-shirts to a funeral. I did show up as the rabbi in a Hawaiian shirt and shorts to a funeral because I was told that was the attire that the family wanted everyone to dress in for the funeral. Because the guy who died spent a ton of time surfing in Hawaii. And to honor him, they wanted everybody to wear a Hawaiian shirt and shorts. And so it was the weirdest feeling I've ever had leading a funeral with a lei around my neck. But we kind of dress nicely. There's a couple of places where people rise, and you should rise. The one is that El Male Rachamim prayer, God full of compassion prayer that I said. The other is the Kaddish, that other prayer that I mentioned. And so people will stand up for those prayers, and you can stand up. In the cemetery, it's proper to not sit in front of where the family is sitting. And when we do the burial part, it's proper for the family to be the first ones to shovel earth, and then for everyone else who's a guest who feels so moved to do so, can come and place earth after that. In Jewish tradition, there's an idea of this. I think every religion should do this. I think all humans should do this. But Jewish tradition teaches that there's when you visit someone who is in mourning, anybody know what you're supposed to say to them? All right, listen carefully. Here you go. This is not just a Jewish lesson, it's a human lesson. This is what you should say to someone who is in mourning. Would you like me to repeat it? Nothing you say matters. I know that doesn't make you feel good. Nothing you say matters. As a matter of fact, sometimes what you can say hurts people. You know what matters? Your presence. Being there matters. And so Judaism actually teaches that you don't speak to the mourner unless they speak to you first. It doesn't mean you ignore them. You can walk in, you can shake hands, you can hug, you can sit next to them. But I know how you feel. No, you don't. I know how you feel because my dad died 10 years ago. No, you know how you felt 10 years ago. You don't know how I feel now. He's in a better place. My response? No, he's not. He's dead. That sounds very harsh to say, but that's what it is. He's not in a better place. If he was in a better place, why didn't he die a long time ago to get to the better place, right? If it's Disneyland, why didn't he die a long time ago to go to Disneyland, right? My relative died of the same thing. That doesn't help me. You know what helps me? You're here. I tell mourners all the time in my congregation, when people come up and say that stuff to you, and it hurts you, here's what I want you to hear. While they're talking, whatever words they're saying, blah, 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 I want you to hear this. I'm here for you. I heard something stupid in a movie when someone died, and that's what I'm saying to you, because I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. So please ignore my words and just know I'm here if you need me. That's what I tell all my congregants when mourners come, when people come to visit them. Don't listen to anything they have to say. Just accept their presence. And it's a good idea for all of us, I think. For us, just be there for that person. If they want to talk to you, they will. If they need something from you, they'll tell you. But words that we share with them, I don't think they mean anything. We can pray with them when they initiate it. We can comfort them when they ask for it with words. But just being there, that's really what it's all about in terms of how we take care of a mourner. And so as a non-Jewish person coming, that's the thing. Just be there for them. Stand up during the ceremony when we stand up. Offer a hug. You don't need to offer words. Offer your presence.
I think that's a beautiful way to end this forum. I know that's 10 minutes over, and I know there were many other questions that you all had, so thank you very much. Perhaps if Rabbi Sherwood has time afterwards, we can engage with him. Thank you, Rabbi Sherwood.
My pleasure. Thank you. And again, thank you for learning with me today. I just think it's such a beautiful thing when we learn about other people's traditions and other people's customs. I think it enriches all of us. And so thank you for coming together so we can all enrich each other. Appreciate it.